He saw them before anyone else did, 4 men, wrong posture, wrong timing, moving like one body with 4 pairs of legs toward a woman who didn't know they were coming. He was a carpenter, a part-time security guard, a man who showed up tonight because $340 paid for a week of groceries. He had no weapon, no backup, no plan. He had 10 feet and a decision, so he hit the first man so hard a dessert table became a crime scene. He took a blade to the forearm and kept moving. He took an elbow to the jaw and didn't go down. He put all 4 of them on the floor in under 40 seconds, while 200 people in formal wear stood there frozen. Then he looked at the woman he'd just saved. She looked back at him the way people looked at things they didn't have a category for yet. "Who are you?" she asked. "Security," he said. "Venue contract?" She almost smiled. "Almost. You're bleeding, I know." Ryan Merritt hated formal wear, not in the way people said it at parties, laughing, loosening their tie for effect. He meant it the way you meant a bad knee or a recurring nightmare. The suit belonged to his co-worker Derek. Derek was 2 inches shorter and had different ideas about what fit meant around the shoulders. Ryan had spent the last 40 minutes trying not to breathe too deep. Outside, October pressed cold against the windows of Hargrove Hall. Inside, the kind of money that didn't need to announce itself filled every corner of the room. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing something European and melancholy. Champagne in glasses so thin, you were afraid to hold them wrong. Ryan held his near a support column and didn't drink it. He was here because Sentinel Protection Services paid $340 for a security shift. Better than 3 days planing oak boards for the Kellerman kitchen remodel. He needed both jobs, and he wasn't embarrassed about that anymore. Embarrassment was a luxury. He had a 15-year-old daughter, a mortgage on a house that needed a new roof, and a truck with a transmission that hummed wrong when it got cold. $340 bought groceries for a week. So, he wore Derek's suit and stood near the east entrance and watched people who had never worried about groceries talk to each other about things he didn't follow. He didn't need to follow. He needed to watch the door, the crowd, the edges of things. That was what he was good at. Lily sat at a corner table 30 feet away, half hidden behind an elaborate ice sculpture of an eagle with its wings spread. She had her laptop open and her honey-brown hair in a braid that had mostly survived the drive over. She was supposed to be working on her AP history essay due Monday. The topic was post-war economic restructuring. She'd picked it herself, which said everything. She wasn't doing the essay. Ryan could tell by the angle of her head. When she worked on schoolwork, her chin dropped, shoulders curved inward, the posture of someone reading seriously. Right now, her chin was up, eyes moving. She was watching the room the way he'd trained himself to watch rooms, except nobody had trained her. She just did it. Had done it since she was 7. Sitting in the back of his truck, watching a parking lot, while he ran into the hardware store, pointing out when he got back that the man by the fire hydrant had been there when they arrived, and was still there and wasn't doing anything, which she said seemed strange. He'd agreed that it seemed strange. That had been 8 years ago. Diane was still alive then, which meant Ryan still remembered how to laugh at things without thinking about it first. He didn't go down that road tonight. He had a shift to work. The event was the annual Catalyst Foundation Gala, and the woman at the center of it, the reason the room arranged itself the way it did without anyone saying so, was Sandra Voss. He'd read the briefing on the drive over while Lily drove, which she wasn't technically licensed to do in traffic, but which he allowed in parking lots when he needed to read. Because sometimes you had to choose your battles. Sandra Voss, 44, founder and CEO of Harlow Data Security, started the company in 2007 in a 2-bedroom apartment in Boston with 1 laptop and a contract she'd written herself because she couldn't afford a lawyer. Now the company protected payment processing infrastructure for 11 of the country's largest financial institutions. 3 years ago, she'd testified before the Senate about a security breach at 3 major banks. Named names. Presented evidence that senior leadership at all 3 had known about the vulnerabilities and chosen not to disclose them. One of those banks, Pinnacle Financial, had collapsed within 8 months of her testimony. Stock wiped out, 4,000 jobs gone, thousands of retirement accounts holding Pinnacle shares worth nothing. The CFO of Pinnacle, a man named Dennis Aldridge, had transferred significant funds offshore in the weeks before the collapse and disappeared before federal charges could be filed. Outstanding federal warrant. No confirmed sightings in 18 months. Sandra Voss had made powerful people look bad. More than that, she'd made powerful people lose everything. She'd done it because the information was accurate and the public interest required it. Not everyone saw it that way. She stood near the center of the ballroom, now in a dress the color of a deep ocean photograph, dark teal, that caught the light differently depending on where she was standing. Her dark hair was up. She was laughing at something a man in a gray tuxedo had said, and the laugh reached her eyes, which meant she actually found it funny. Ryan had watched enough forced social situations to know the difference. Her security detail stood 7 meters away. 2 men, both capable-looking, both relaxed, too relaxed, maybe. But it was a charity gala in Providence. Nothing happened at charity galas in Providence. Ryan kept that thought at the back of his mind where it belonged. In his experience, that sentence was always the last thing someone thought before something happened. He sipped the champagne. Mostly so he had something to do with his hands. Then his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. A text from the table with the ice eagle, Camicon northwest corner not moving. Few minutes now, he read it twice, looked up, found the northwest camera on the ceiling, above the service entrance that led toward the kitchen corridor. Tracked it for 5 seconds. It wasn't sweeping. All the other cameras were doing their 30-second arcs, slow and steady. That one was fixed. Not broken looking, not physically wrong, just stopped. He texted back, "Stay where you are." Then he put the champagne on a passing tray and started moving. He didn't run. Running in a crowded formal event caused panic and drew attention away from the thing you needed people to be watching. He moved with purpose at social speed, which was fast enough to cover ground without anyone tracking him as unusual. He was doing the math as he moved. Northwest camera, service entrance, kitchen corridor. If someone had neutralized that camera and was coming from that direction, they were already past the checkpoint, already inside the perimeter. He was 15 feet from the service door when it opened. 4 men came through. Burgundy catering vests, the same color as the Hargrove Hall staff. Hands empty, not carrying anything, not heading anywhere specific in the purposeful way of catering staff with a job to do. Ryan stopped walking, let himself be still for exactly 2 seconds. The thing that was wrong wasn't visible. It was a frequency. The way people in groups moved when they'd rehearsed moving, when no one needed to check on anyone else because everyone already knew exactly where everyone else was going. It was the absence of the small adjustments that real groups made in real time. These 4 men moved like a single body with 4 pairs of legs. The lead man's eyes found Sandra Voss from across the room and didn't move again. Ryan was already closing the distance when the man's hand went to the inside of his vest, 20 feet. The fingers were reaching for something with the kind of practiced certainty that meant they'd reached for it 1,000 times before. 15, not a phone, wrong angle. Wrong deliberateness, 10, Ryan didn't shout. A shout would give them half a second of warning, enough time to adapt, enough time for someone in the crowd to step the wrong direction. He'd learned this the hard way in places he didn't talk about. The warning was a gift to the person being warned. He hit the lead man at the shoulder with everything he had. The impact drove them both sideways into a dessert table. The table went. Chocolate mousse, a tower of petit fours, 3 stacked fruit plates, and a centerpiece that shattered went with it. The man's hand had been 3 inches from what turned out to be a tactical blade, short and flat and very serious, which spun out across the floor and disappeared under a chair. The room erupted. Screams first, then the confused sound of a crowd that didn't know which direction danger was coming from, which meant the sound came from all directions at once. Glass breaking somewhere, a woman's voice, high and sharp. The string quartet stopping mid-phrase, the absence of music almost louder than the noise. Ryan was already off the first man and turning. The second had moved on Sandra. She'd stepped back fast, heels catching wrong on the marble, hand going out to catch herself on the arm of a nearby man who stumbled with her. Her security detail was 3 seconds behind, turning from the bar where something had apparently gone wrong moments ago, which Ryan noted without processing, because processing would come later. He caught the second attacker's extended wrist, turned his hip into it, used the man's forward momentum to redirect him straight into the third, and both of them hit the side of a table and went down in a cascade of wine glasses. The fourth was different. Ryan felt it immediately. This one had already assessed the situation and recalibrated. Where the first 3 had committed to their approach and kept committing, this one had stopped, reset, and was coming in with a different line. The strike he launched was aimed at the throat, not the body, which was what a trained person did when they needed to end something quickly. Ryan got his forearm up. The block worked, but it cost him. The impact ran up to his elbow, and his grip on the situation slipped for half a second. And in half a second the man circled, and Ryan took an elbow across the side of his jaw. Stars, copper at the back of his throat. He shook it, and didn't go down, and found his center of gravity again, and hit the man once hard, in the center of his chest, then swept the man's lead foot, and the man dropped and didn't get back up. The first man was on his feet again. Ryan grabbed a serving tray from a cart to his right. Silver, heavy, not a weapon anyone planned around, but useful. The man lunged with a second blade he'd produced from somewhere, and Ryan deflected it. With the tray, heard the steel scrape metal, and on the backswing put the tray into the man's face, with the full weight of his body behind it. The man went down. Ryan stood in the middle of what used to be a charity gala and breathed. The whole thing had taken under 40 seconds. He knew because he'd been counting, the way he always counted, the way counting gave chaos a shape you could work inside of. Sandra Voss's security detail finally reached her, weapons out, shouting commands at the 4 men on the floor, in various states of consciousness. Hotel security was moving from 3 directions. Someone was on a phone. Someone else was still making sounds of shock somewhere near the far wall, the residue of panic looking for a place to land. Ryan's jaw was going to bruise. He could feel the swelling starting already, a dull heat below his left cheekbone. His shoulder would be stiff tomorrow from the initial tackle. His knuckles were scraped from something he hadn't even registered at the time. He looked at Sandra Voss. She was looking at him. She'd moved away from her security detail slightly. Not a lot, just enough to see past them. Her composure was extraordinary. Her hands weren't shaking visibly, though the tension in her jaw said her body was handling the aftermath in its own way. Her eyes were doing what he'd read about her in the briefing, the thing that showed up in every profile written about her. She was reading him. Assessing, categorizing, deciding, "Are you hurt?" His voice came out steady, which surprised him slightly given the copper taste still at the back of his throat. She took a breath. Measured. "No," a pause that held more than the word before it. "Who are you?" "Security." "Sentinel protection, not mine, number Fenu contract." She looked at the 4 men on the ground, looked back at him. They weren't random, not a question. A conclusion she'd already arrived at. No, they weren't. Lily appeared at his shoulder then, laptop clutched to her chest, face the color of old concrete. She'd crossed the room when she should have stayed put, which he would deal with later and also had expected, because Lily did not stay put when it mattered. "Dad." Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was frightened and refusing to show it. Even and slightly too careful. "Are you okay?" "Fine." He put a hand on her shoulder, steadied her without making a show of it. "The camera was good, Lily. You were right to text me." She nodded, but her eyes weren't on him. They were moving across the 4 men on the floor, cataloging faces with the automatic efficiency of someone who couldn't turn that part of herself off any more than she could stop breathing. Brief-eye. He wondered sometimes if she knew how much she looked like her mother when she did that. He decided not to go down that road right now either. Detective Lawrence Porter arrived. 22 minutes after the first police call, which was reasonable for a Friday evening in Providence when resources were already stretched across the Hill District. Porter was 53, built like a man who had been athletic once, and hadn't entirely let it go, with a face that had stopped being surprised by things some years back. He shook Ryan's hand and said he'd been told Ryan was former military. And Ryan said, "Yes, sir. Force Recon. 8 years." And Porter said, "Thank you for your service," and meant it rather than saying it as a thing people said. And that distinction mattered to Ryan more than he usually admitted. They talked for 30 minutes in the private lounge off the main ballroom, the one with velvet furniture and a painting of the Newport Bridge at sunset that was technically competent and completely soulless. Lily sat on the arm of a love seat with her laptop open. Gregory Holt, Sandra's CISO, stood near the window with a tablet, his fingers moving in short bursts. Gregory was 54, salt and pepper hair cut practically, the look of a man who had spent so much of his life staring at screens that he was mildly surprised when people expected him to engage with three-dimensional space. He was good at his job. Ryan had been able to tell that within 90 seconds of watching him work, Gregory said, not looking up from his tablet. Northwest camera was manually adjusted. Refresh rate changed from 30 seconds to 47, creates a blind spot on exactly the approach vector those 4 men used, a pause. This wasn't a system error. Someone logged into the building's back end and changed that specific parameter. Porter. When? 3 weeks ago. Timestamp is clean. Access used credentials belonging to an IT staff member on Hargrove Hall's systems team. Stolen credentials? If the staff member didn't do it themselves, which I'm going to assume for now, then yes. Phishing is most likely. Send someone a convincing enough HR email asking them to verify their login. They click, you have what you need. Takes an afternoon to set up, costs nothing. So not sophisticated, Porter said. Technically simple. But patient. Gregory looked up for the first time. They changed that setting 3 weeks ago and left it alone. Didn't touch anything else. Didn't trigger any alerts. Just changed one small thing and waited. Ryan listened to this and felt the shape of it settle into place. This wasn't opportunity. Someone had looked at this specific event, this specific venue, this specific target, and spent 3 weeks building a very small but very precise advantage. The kind of planning that happened when you were confident in your target and your timeline. Sandra sat in an armchair near the fireplace. She'd been given a glass of water she hadn't touched. She was watching Porter and Gregory the way she'd watched the room at the gala, with the same quality of attention. Absorbing. Processing. Whoever adjusted that camera knew which camera mattered, she said, her voice carrying across the room. Not all of them. Just that one. Porter nodded, which means they'd either been in this room before, or they'd had access to the security layout. Venue hires several contractors for events this size, Gregory said. Catering, additional cleaning, audio-visual setup. Any of them could have walked that space without raising any flags. The uniforms, Ryan said. 3 heads turned toward him. He'd been mostly quiet since the initial account, and he hadn't been tracking the camera conversation because Lily had been tracking it, and that was a reasonable division of labor. The burgundy vests, they were real. Not knockoffs, not dyed something close. The exact shade, the exact embroidery, the right weight of fabric. Someone had access to authentic Hargrove Hall catering staff uniforms. Porter made a note, Sandra said quietly, which means someone with inside access, or someone who bought access, which is faster and requires less trust. Ryan noticed Lily had gone very still on the arm of the love seat. She was looking at the screen but not typing. He knew this posture. She'd found something or was about to. Dad, tone flat, careful. The voice she used when she wasn't sure yet how important something was. The vehicle. He crossed to her. On the screen was a screenshot from what appeared to be a street-level traffic camera feed, grainy, timestamped from 7:48 p.m., nearly an hour before the attack. A dark sedan, parked half a block from Hargrove Hall's service entrance. License plate partially visible. I was watching the traffic camera from outside, while everything was happening inside, Lily said. The building has a public feed, not the security system, just the street cameras. This car arrived at 7:48 and left at 8:52. 5 minutes after the attack started. 5 minutes isn't enough time to drive anywhere, Ryan said. No. It's enough time to receive a message and decide to leave. Ryan looked at the partial plate, looked at his daughter. That's good work. She didn't thank him for saying it. She just took a screenshot and sent it to Gregory's work email with a 2-word message that said traffic cam and went back to looking at the feed. Porter was watching this exchange. Ryan noticed him noticing and said nothing about it. They let Porter go around midnight with promises of full written statements by tomorrow afternoon. Sandra's security detail had finally gotten organized in the way that people got organized after the emergency had already passed. The kind of organization that looked thorough on paper. 2 of the 4 attackers were being transported to Rhode Island Hospital with non-critical injuries. The other 2 were in police custody and declining to speak. Sandra said she would cover a hotel room for Ryan and Lily. Ryan started to decline and she said, not unkindly but without any softness either, your home address is in Sentinel's employment records. Sentinel's records are accessible to anyone with a moderately good reason to access them, which includes anyone who wanted to find out who got in the way tonight. Don't sleep at your house. He thought about this for 3 seconds. 1 room is fine. 2 rooms, she said. You have a teenager. They ended up at the Biltmore on Kennedy Plaza. Sandra's company card handled it. Lily walked through the lobby, looking at the ceiling the way she looked at ceilings in old buildings with the interested expression of someone who understood load-bearing architecture, was also sometimes aesthetic choice. In the elevator she said, those men were military, yes. Not all American, 2 of them maybe. The others had different training, different baseline, how can you tell? The way the 4th one moved, his footwork, the specific drills, different school. He looked at the elevator doors. Your mother would have made me explain that better. Lily was quiet for a moment. She would have asked you to diagram it. She would have asked me to diagram it and then found 3 things wrong with the diagram. The elevator opened. They walked down a carpeted hallway that was very quiet. Outside the door to her room, Lily said, Dad, the camera, it wasn't just adjusted. He stopped. What? It was adjusted 3 weeks ago. Gregory said that. But the way it was adjusted, the parameter that was changed, it's not something you do in a public-facing admin panel. It's back-end access. You'd need to know the system architecture. She had her key card in her hand and was turning it over, the way she turned things over when she was thinking. Someone didn't just get a stolen password. They knew what they were looking for when they got in. They knew exactly which setting to change and why, which means they knew the system, which means they'd either attacked systems like this before, or they'd been specifically studying this one for longer than 3 weeks. She stopped turning the card. The camera was just the last step. The preparation was much longer. Ryan stood in the hallway of a hotel he couldn't afford and looked at his daughter, who was 15 and had 30 minutes ago watched him put 4 people on the ground and had since been methodically building a clearer picture of the event than the first responders had managed. Go to sleep, he said. I will, Lily, I said. I will. He went to his own room and lay on top of the covers and ran through the sequence for 2 hours the way he'd run through sequences after combat, cataloging errors, cataloging what had worked, finding the load-bearing elements of the situation so he'd know where to push tomorrow. He fell asleep somewhere after 2 and woke before 5, which was not unusual. He was dressed before 6. He went down to the lobby, found the attached coffee shop, bought 2 large coffees, and stood at the pickup counter, thinking about what Lily had said in the hallway. The camera was just the last step. The preparation was much longer, 3 weeks to adjust the camera. But how long before that to acquire the credentials? To study the system? To identify the right camera, the right angle, the right parameter to change? Whoever had done this had spent months on a 30-second adjustment, which meant they were not in a hurry. And people who were not in a hurry were often the most dangerous kind. He carried the coffees back toward the elevator. Sandra was already in the hotel's small business center when he passed it. She had 3 windows open on a laptop and a pen in her hand, even though she wasn't writing with it, which was the kind of habit that told you someone had trained themselves out of fidgeting and hadn't entirely succeeded. She looked up when he came in, looked at the 2 coffees, accepted the one he held toward her without ceremony. Gregory found the partial plate from Lily's screenshot, she said without preamble. Car rented at TF. Green last Wednesday under a corporate account registered to an LLC in Nevada. LLC doesn't appear to have a physical address or any operational history. Shell company, clean one. Nothing obvious connecting it to anything. She set her pen down, but it was rented Wednesday. 4 days before the gala, Ryan sat across from her. They were here for 4 days before, minimum, scouting, most likely. She turned one of the laptop screens toward him. I've been looking at Pinnacle Financial, specifically the 18 months before its collapse. I want you to understand why I did what I did before we talk about what comes next. Ryan looked at the screen. Financial documents, some of them partially redacted. The kind of thing that came out of federal proceedings. He wasn't a financial analyst. He read the shape of it rather than the specifics. The breach at Pinnacle wasn't an accident, Sandra said. It wasn't negligence. Senior leadership knew. They'd been told by their own internal security team twice, and they'd decided the cost of remediation was higher than the reputational risk of disclosure. They were gambling on nobody finding out. She paused. Meanwhile, the breach was being actively exploited. Funds were moving through compromised infrastructure. Small amounts at first, then larger. It was systematic, and Dennis Aldridge, was CFO. The funds that moved offshore in the 6 weeks before Pinnacle's collapse passed through accounts he controlled. Federal investigators are confident he knew. Confident isn't the same as proved, which is why there's a warrant and not a conviction. She took her coffee. He moved approximately $170 million. Estimates vary. The money went through enough accounts in enough jurisdictions that tracing it has taken years and isn't finished. Ryan thought about $170 million for a moment. He tried to make the number real and couldn't, which said something about the distance between his life and this situation. That's enough to fund a lot of things, he said. Including a professional operation targeting one person. She looked at him steadily. Including whatever comes next, the phrase landed in the space between them. Ryan didn't look away. You think there's a next? 4 men in a professional box formation don't represent Aldridge's entire capacity. They represent what he was willing to spend on a first attempt. She paused. The gala was public. Witnesses. Cameras. If it had worked, it would have sent a very specific message. Not just that I was vulnerable, but that I was vulnerable even at an event meant to celebrate my reputation. The humiliation was part of it, and when it didn't work, he adjusts. He's a man who spent 20 years in high finance. He doesn't give up because the first trade goes wrong. He recalibrates. She looked at her coffee. I've been thinking about this since approximately 9:15 last night. They sat with that for a moment. Ryan said, "Who else knew you'd be at the gala?" The event was public. It was on the Catalyst Foundation's website. My attendance was listed. My routine for events like this is not a secret. I use the same security company for most Providence area events. I typically arrive within a 20-minute window of the stated start time. She said it with a trace of something that wasn't quite self-reproach, but was adjacent to it. I've been predictable. That changes? Yes. Starting today, she almost smiled. Not quite. But the line of her mouth shifted in a way that acknowledged the directness. Gregory arrived at 8:15, looking like a man who had slept 3 hours somewhere uncomfortable and wanted to tell you about it, but was professionally trained not to. He had his tablet and a paper coffee cup and a piece of information. The 4 men, he said. Two of them are confirmed former contractors with a private security firm called Vanguard Tactical Solutions. Interpol has records. Delaware registration, but they operate internationally, and the Delaware address is a mail service. Sandra, without inflection. Private security or mercenaries. The line is theoretical. Gregory sat. There's something else. 2 hours after they were arrested, high-end criminal defense attorneys showed up with a judge's order. The retainer was $50,000. Cash. Ryan looked at him. Cash. Someone had those lawyers on standby. Pre-arranged. With cash already provided, the implication settled in the room. Someone had assumed failure as a possibility before the operation launched, and had already funded the contingency, which meant nothing about this was improvised. Nothing. Lily came in at 8:23 with her backpack over her shoulder, and the expression of someone who had not entirely slept, but wasn't to admit it. She looked at the three adults, assessed the energy in the room, and sat down without asking if she was allowed to. One of the men, she said. The one with the scar on his chin. I saw him, before the others came through the door. Three adults looked at her. Around 8:30. He came out of the kitchen corridor, stood at the edge of the room for about 5 minutes, then went back through. He wasn't carrying anything. He was watching the room. She set her laptop on the table. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I thought maybe he was a supervisor doing a check. But he was looking at the room the same way Dad looks at rooms. Porter had left her his card with a direct number. She'd already texted him the description, the approximate time, the location, and what she'd observed. Porter had texted back, "Good detail. We'll follow up," Gregory said to no one in particular. She texted Detective Porter before she told us. "Information goes where it's most useful first," Lily said. She opened her laptop. "That's what my mom always said." A silence. Not uncomfortable, the kind that happened when something true landed in a room and people gave it a moment. Sandra was looking at Lily. The same quality of attention she'd given Ryan the night before. The reading a document attention that preceded a significant decision. Ryan's phone buzzed. Porter. A text, Vanguard Tactical Solutions. Third confirmed contact from database. These weren't random hires. Someone used a specific network. "We need to talk." Ryan set the phone down on the table where Sandra and Gregory could see it. Sandra read it. Her jaw was very still. "He used Vanguard," she said. "Flat, certain. We don't know it's Aldridge yet. We know enough." She looked at Ryan. Her eyes weren't frightened. They were the eyes of someone who had just confirmed a calculation she'd been making through the night and didn't like the answer, but preferred knowing it to not knowing it. "I want to hire you," she said. "Both of you in different capacities. Consulting. While we find out exactly what we're dealing with." Ryan looked at Lily. Lily looked at him with the very carefully neutral face that meant she had opinions and was waiting to be addressed. "I'm a carpenter," Ryan said. "Lily is 15 and has a history essay due Monday. Your history essay was due Monday at a school where nobody is trying to get at you through your father. That equation has changed." She didn't say it hard. Just accurate. Whoever planned last night knows Ryan intervened. They have resources and they will find out who he is, if they don't know already. "The Sentinel employment records I mentioned," Lily said. "She has a point." Ryan looked at the ceiling briefly. To Sandra he said, "Lily doesn't go into anything operational. She's a student, agreed. Her school schedule is non-negotiable, agreed. And I need to know everything you know about Aldridge. Not the summary. Everything." Sandra nodded once. "I'll have Gregory pull the full file." She paused. "There's one more thing I should tell you before we go further. When I testified about Pinnacle, I knew it would damage them. I knew people would lose jobs. I knew Aldridge would lose everything." She met his eyes. "I also knew that the alternative was allowing a compromised financial infrastructure to keep operating and eventually fail in a way that would affect far more people. I made a calculation. I stand by it. But I want you to understand that the person coming after me believes he has a legitimate grievance, which makes him more dangerous than someone acting on pure malice." Ryan thought about this. "A man who believes he's right doesn't recalibrate when things go wrong," he said. He escalates. Yes, then we need to move faster than he does. Outside the hotel window, Providence was doing what mid-October in Providence did. Grey sky, wind off the bay. The kind of morning that arrived before the season officially permitted it to be cold, that found you underdressed and unready. Ryan Merritt drank his coffee and watched the city and understood that the shift he'd worked for $340 had just become something else entirely. He wasn't sure yet what it was going to cost. He knew, with the clarity of someone who had walked into enough uncertain situations to recognize the feeling in his chest. Before his mind caught up to it, that the cost was going to be significant, he also knew, which surprised him slightly, that he intended to pay it. The Harlow data security offices occupied floors 18 through 24 of a glass building on the corner of Dyer and Exchange that had been built in the early 90s with the architectural confidence of a decade that believed in angles. The lobby had a security desk, a badge reader, and a receptionist named Paul, who greeted Sandra by name and Ryan and Lily with the particular professionalism of someone trained to make strangers feel expected. Ryan had not felt expected. He felt like a carpenter in a loner suit who had not slept enough and was now carrying his daughter's backup laptop because her bag was too full. The elevator to the 18th floor was glass on one side. Providence spread below them as they rose. The bay was visible from the 14th floor up, grey-green in the October morning. Cargo ships moving with the patience of things that had all the time in the world. Lily watched the city and didn't say anything. She'd barely touched breakfast. Ryan had noticed and said nothing. Because she did this. Sometimes when she was working through something in the background, when the part of her brain that processed and filed and cross-referenced was running hot, and the part that remembered to eat had been temporarily reassigned. Diane had done the same thing. He'd learned early in their marriage not to put food in front of her and expect acknowledgement. You left it somewhere, she'd eventually find it, and she'd look up from whatever she was doing and be surprised and grateful in equal measure. He'd left a granola bar on the hotel room table before they left. Lily had taken it without looking up. He counted that as a win. Gregory met them on 18, with the energy of a man who had been at the office since before 7 and had consumed enough coffee to sustain that pace indefinitely. He'd changed his shirt, which suggested he kept a spare at the office, which told Ryan something about how Gregory lived his working life. He led them through a series of glass-walled conference rooms and open workspace areas where people were already at their desks, doing focused, quiet things that Ryan couldn't follow the specifics of, but recognized as serious. The room Gregory brought them to was smaller than the main conference rooms. One table, 6 chairs, a screen on the wall that was currently dark, and a window that looked out at the side of another building rather than the water, a working room. Not for impressing people. Sandra was already there. She'd changed from the hotel morning practicality into something sharper, a charcoal suit that meant the day was going to require authority, and she was ready to provide it. She had 3 physical folders on the table in front of her, and a coffee she was almost done with. She looked up when they came in, and the quality of her attention was the same as it had been since Hargrove Hall. The reading a document attention, except now the document was the situation, and she was deciding which parts needed to be addressed first. Age's Sharon Clark arrived 11 minutes later. She knocked once before coming in, which was technically a courtesy and functionally an announcement. 40 years old, brown hair cut short and practical, a dark suit that wasn't about fashion. She carried a tablet and a leather portfolio and had the slightly compressed energy of someone who'd been awake longer than she was willing to say. She looked at Ryan for a moment longer than a standard introduction required. You're the man from the gala, yes. Former Force Recon, yes. And this is your daughter. She looked at Lily the way adults sometimes looked at Lily when they'd been told about her, with the recalibrating expression of someone whose mental image needed adjustment. Lily was 15. She looked 15. Earnest face, braid that had survived a second morning, laptop open on the table in front of her because she'd put it there before anyone told her she could. Lily said, "Hi." Clark said, "Hi." Then she sat down, opened her portfolio, and got to work in the way of someone who had a great deal to cover and a clear preference for covering it efficiently: Vanguard Tactical Solutions. She said the name the way you said the name of something you'd been looking at from a distance for long enough to know its shape. Delaware registration, operating since 2018. Legitimate contracts on paper, and by legitimate she meant the kind of work that looked defensible in a filing. Corporate risk assessment, executive protection consulting, threat analysis for high-value assets. The kind of language that meant something and also could mean anything. Unofficially, Clark said, they take contracts that move into grayer territory. Intelligence gathering that crosses into surveillance, physical operations that cross into intimidation. We've had Vanguard on our radar for 14 months. Never enough to move on, she paused. Until now we had suggestive patterns and a lot of plausible deniability. Now we have 4 of their known contractors in custody, and a cash retainer paid to criminal defense attorneys that came from somewhere. Gregory pulled up the financial trace on the wall screen. The numbers were organized into a clean visual flow that Ryan could follow even without the underlying expertise. Arrows connecting entities, dollar amounts in boxes, dates in a column on the right. $1.6 million, Gregory said. Moved 6 weeks before the gala. Originates in a trust registered under a name that doesn't immediately connect to anything or anyone. But the trust was established 14 months ago, using a law firm in Newark, that we've seen associated with Pinnacle adjacent entities in previous analysis. He moved to the next slide. The trust transferred funds to an LLC in Nevada called Cascade Ridge Consulting. No website. Registered address is a UPS store in Henderson. From there, the money moved in 3 transfers to Vanguard. Sandra was looking at the screen with the expression of someone confirming something they already knew and wishing they were wrong. Clark said, "We can't prove Aldridge owns that trust. Not yet. The layering is competent, but the connection to Pinnacle adjacent entities through the law firm is not nothing." She looked at Sandra. "Combined with your testimony history and Aldridge's federal warrant status, we're building a picture." Ryan said, "What does the picture still need?" Clark looked at him, considered whether she was going to answer directly. She decided yes. A clearer connection between Aldridge and the trust. Right now we have circumstantial proximity. We need something that closes the gap. A financial movement that's harder to explain, a communication, a witness who can place him in contact with Vanguard's principals. She closed her portfolio. The 4 men in custody aren't talking. Their lawyers are very good. We've seen this pattern before with Vanguard operations. The contractors take the risk, the client stays clean, Ryan said. "Who knows about this conversation, Clark?" "My team, 3 agents, and everyone in this room. That's the universe you need to manage." She looked at him. The look had a slight edge. Not hostile. The edge of someone who knew their job, and was noting that he knew it too. "I'm aware," she said. What happened next was the kind of morning that didn't feel like it was moving until you stopped and found that 6 hours had passed. Clark worked with Gregory on the financial documentation, building the evidentiary chain that the warrant application would need. Sandra took calls she couldn't defer. Ryan reviewed building security protocols with the facilities manager, a methodical man named Harold, who had very strong opinions about the elevator maintenance schedule and needed redirecting several times back to the things that actually mattered. Lily sat at the end of the conference table with her laptop open. She was doing her AP history essay. Mostly. The mostly was a note she slid to Ryan at 11:30 that said, in her neat small handwriting, "Marcus Webb, Vanguard Tactical, Delaware suit. Last year, found a refile this morning." Webb was Vanguard's operational lead for East Coast contracts. Civil dispute withdrawn before trial. Ryan looked at the note. Looked at Lily. She was already back to her essay, typing at a pace that suggested she was making up for lost time and had no interest in being thanked for the other thing. He gave the note to Clark, who photographed it and made another call. Lunch was sandwiches from the building's second-floor cafe, brought up by Gregory's assistant on a tray. Ryan ate his standing at the window. Sandra didn't eat. He noticed and didn't comment. She was on her fourth call of the hour, and whatever the call was about was making her jaw work in a way that meant controlled frustration at something bureaucratic that wasn't moving fast enough. Lily ate half a sandwich and discovered the other half of the granola bar from the morning in her jacket pocket and finished that too. At 2:15, Clark asked to speak to Ryan privately. They stood in the hallway outside the conference room, which was not private in the architectural sense but was quiet enough, Clark said. Walter Haynes, Ryan waited, Harlow's director of business development, 9 years with the company. He's on the access log for the conference room that Gregory flagged. 2 anomalous login events from an internal IP, after hours, on dates that correspond to weekly management meetings. Gregory identified him this morning. She looked at Ryan steadily. Before we take this to Sandra, I want your read on how she's going to handle it. Ryan thought about this. Not about the answer, which was straightforward, about why Clark was asking him rather than just proceeding, which was the more interesting question. She'll handle it professionally, he said. It won't be easy for her. They've known each other a long time. But she's not going to protect him from what he did. How do you know that? Because she testified in front of the Senate about people she'd worked with for years and didn't soften it. Clark studied him for a moment longer than the question required. Then she nodded once, and they went back in. Sandra's reaction to Walter Haynes's name was to stop moving entirely for about 4 seconds. 4 seconds of absolute stillness, the kind that happened when a body was absorbing something the mind hadn't finished processing. Then, she said, "Tell me what you have." And Gregory told her, calmly and completely, and she listened without interrupting. When Gregory finished, she said, "I want to talk to him. Before you bring him in formally, I want to talk to him first," Clark said. "That's not standard procedure." "No, but he's been on my team for 9 years, and if there's a reason for this that I don't understand yet, I want to hear it from him directly before it becomes official." She looked at Clark. "You can have someone outside the room. You can record it. I'm not trying to protect him. I just need to understand." Clark considered this for a long moment with the expression of someone weighing institutional procedure against the practical reality in front of them. 1 hour, she said. "Then he's mine." Walter Haynes came to the small conference room at 3 p.m. looking like a man who had spent a week knowing this was coming and had not slept well for any of it. He was 58, gray hair, thinner than his company photo from 2 years ago, in a way that spoke to something ongoing rather than something recent. He sat down across from Sandra and looked at his hands and didn't wait for her to ask. "Patrick," he said. His voice was the voice of someone who had rehearsed this and found that rehearsal didn't help the way he'd hoped. "My son." 29 years old. Sandra's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 11 months ago. The treatment protocol at Mayo Clinic, which is the only option that gives him a real chance, costs between $800,000 and $1 million too, depending on how far it goes. Insurance won't cover experimental trials. He stopped. "I sold the house in March. I borrowed everything I could borrow. I was still short by $400,000, and the clinic needed a commitment before the end of the fiscal quarter, or Patrick lost his slot." Ryan was standing at the back of the room. Clark was outside the glass, visible through the door. Lily was not in this room. Ryan had told her to stay in the main conference room, and she had looked at him for a moment and then gone, which meant she understood the weight of what was about to happen even if she didn't know the specifics. Walter said, "A man approached me 4 months ago, professional, polite. He said he could arrange the funding. He said he had certain clients who needed certain information, and that I was positioned to provide it in a way that was very low risk. Very limited." He looked at his hands. "He wanted the access log for Sandra's schedule, and he wanted me to leave a small device attached to the conference room router during the weekly meetings. A passive logger. He said it would record connection data, nothing more," Sandra said. You knew what that meant. Walter was quiet. You knew, she said again, not as an accusation, just as a fact that needed to exist in the air between them. I told myself it was minor, he said. I told myself that what I was giving them wasn't dangerous. That it was procedural information that anyone could figure out with enough observation time. He looked up finally, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had been living with something for 4 months and was exhausted by the weight of it. I knew. I didn't know what they were planning to do with it. I told myself I didn't know. He stopped. Patrick started treatment 3 weeks ago. The room held very still. Sandra said, Patrick gets to finish his treatment. Her voice had something in it that wasn't forgiveness and wasn't condemnation. It was the voice of someone who had already separated the personal from the operational and was speaking from the operational side. We're going to figure out how to make that happen. But you're going to tell Agent Clark everything, every contact, every instruction, every piece of information you passed. Walter nodded. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying, not quite, which somehow made it worse than if he had been. The man who approached me, Sandra said. What did he look like? Walter described him. Mid-50s, light hair going silver, slim, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who understood that expensive clothes should look effortless rather than expensive. Soft-spoken, the kind of person who could have a conversation in a hotel lobby and no one would look twice. Clark, who had opened the door at some point during the conversation, said, Did he give you a name? Alderman, Walter said. He said to call him Mr. Alderman. Ryan felt the thing that happened when a hypothesis became a confirmed fact. Not satisfaction. The opposite of relief. Because confirmed facts meant the problem was real and specific and needed addressing in ways that hypotheses didn't. He texted Lily a single word. Confirmed. Her response came in 11 seconds. I know. What do we do? He didn't respond to that immediately because it was a better question than a text could answer, and because the answer was still being assembled from pieces that hadn't all arrived yet. Clark spent 40 minutes with Walter after Sandra left the room. Ryan sat in the hallway outside and drank coffee that had been sitting in the machine too long and thought about the shape of what they now knew. Walter had been a conduit, a passive logger in the conference room router, collecting keystroke data from everyone who connected during weekly management meetings. Schedule information flowing to someone who called himself Alderman. The name wasn't subtle. It was the kind of name a man chose when he was hiding in plain sight and didn't want to spend energy on a complicated cover. Aldridge to Alderman. 1 syllable of distance. When Clark came out, she said without preamble, I'm filing the warrant application tonight. Newport is where we start. She looked at Ryan. There's one more thing. Walter described the device he installed in the conference room router. Small, professional installation. He said the man who gave it to him described it as a passive connection logger. She paused. It might be more than that, Ryan said. You think it's still active? I think we should check the router before we assume anything about what it collected. Gregory was called back in. He went to the conference room with a technician and came back 20 minutes later with the particular expression of someone who had confirmed a bad thing and was sitting in how to say it without making it sound worse than it was. The device is a dual-function unit, he said. It logged connection data, yes, but it also captured keystroke activity from every device that connected to the conference room network during meetings, including the laptops that members of our development team used when they ran their weekly Sentinel progress reviews. Sandra said, How long has it been in there? Gregory looked at the access logs he'd pulled on his tablet. Based on the installation signature and the earliest transmission timestamp I can identify, approximately 12 weeks. 12 weeks. 3 months of weekly meetings. 3 months of keystrokes from development laptops. What did they get? Sandra's voice was very controlled. Architecture discussions, implementation debates, decision logs about the integration protocol. Gregory set his tablet down. Not the master keys. Those are on the air-gapped system, completely separate, and the conference room network cannot reach it. But the structural thinking behind Sentinel. the reasoning that shaped how it connects to institutional infrastructure. He paused. Enough to understand the system. From the inside, Sandra stood at the window, the one without the water view, the one that showed the side of another building going dark as the afternoon moved toward evening. She said, enough to know how to attack it, or how to replicate the approach, or how to sell a technical roadmap to someone building a competing system who wanted to understand Harlow's architecture before Sentinel went public. He paused. None of those are good, Ryan said. Don't remove the device. Everyone looked at him. If we remove it, whoever is receiving that feed knows the device was found. They know we're tracking inward. Right now, they think it's still invisible. He looked at Sandra. Clark needs to know. Tonight. If we can use the device to trace the receiving end at the same time as the Newport warrant goes through, we close both ends simultaneously, instead of giving one side time to react to the other, a silence in the room. The particular silence of people absorbing a proposal that required them to leave something dangerous in place and trust that the timing would hold. Sandra said, you want to leave a live surveillance device in our conference room infrastructure, for as long as it takes Clark to identify the receiving address and coordinate the move. And Tuntari, which she said could be tonight or first thing tomorrow. Sandra looked at Gregory. The Sentinel master keys don't touch the conference room network. Correct. The air-gapped system is completely isolated, and nothing operationally sensitive goes through that router between now and when Clark moves. I can lock the room and flag the network segment. Nothing touches it. Without my authorization. Sandra looked at Ryan. If this goes wrong and the timing slips, then we pull the device and take what we have. But if it goes right, we get both. He held her gaze. It's the better play. She made the decision the way she made all of them, quickly and fully, without performing the deliberation. Tell Clark, she said. Clark's reaction to the device was to go quiet for approximately 10 seconds, which Ryan had come to understand was her version of a strong response. Then she made a call that lasted 8 minutes and came back into the working room and said, the warrant application is being amended to include the device as supporting evidence. And I have a technical team that can attempt to trace the transmission signal if they have access to the router and the surrounding network infrastructure. Gregory said, they can have what they need. They'll be here by 9. Clark looked at the table. There's something else I need to tell this room. She paused in the way of someone who had decided to say something they weren't required to say. The amended warrant application, the version that includes the device and the financial trace through Cascade Ridge. I'm filing it myself. Not through the normal team channel, Ryan said. Why? Clark looked at him. Because I want to make sure it gets where it needs to go, without any intermediate handling. She said it in the tone of someone making a statement that was technically complete and practically incomplete. And she looked at Ryan when she said it in a way that contained more information than the words did. Ryan heard what she wasn't saying. He didn't push it in front of the room. After Clark left to coordinate her technical team, Ryan stayed behind, while Gregory and Sandra moved to a separate call about board communications. He sat in the working room alone for a few minutes, which was what he needed to think about what Clark had just communicated without saying it. She was bypassing her normal team channel for the warrant application, which meant she had a reason to not trust the normal team channel, which meant the 3 agents on her team, Paulson, Reyes, and Sutton, were not all equal in her confidence. He went to find Lily. She was where she usually was when things got complicated, in a corner with her laptop, and a level of focus that made the surrounding environment functionally irrelevant. She had 3 tabs open, and was moving between them with the systematic efficiency of someone who had a method and was working it. She looked up when he sat across from her. Read his face the way she'd been reading his face since she was old enough to understand that his face said things his words didn't. What? She said. Clark is filing the warrant application herself. Not through her team. Lily looked at her screen. That means she doesn't trust someone on her team. That's what it means. Do you know who? Not yet. She turned back to her laptop. I'll see what I can find. He started to say something about the limits of what she should be doing with publicly available information and stopped himself because she already knew the limits better than he did, and reminding her would be condescending and also inefficient. Personal phone only, he said instead. I know, Dad. He left her to it and went to find the bathroom, and then the coffee machine, and then the window on the east side of 18, where you could see the full length of the bay on a clear day. And today was almost clear enough. He stood there for a while, doing the thing that looked like nothing, and was actually the thing he was best at, which was waiting for a picture to develop. The picture so far, Aldridge in Newport, operating under the name Alderman. Vanguard contractors hired through a financial chain originating in a trust connected to Pinnacle's law firm. Walter Haynes recruited as an inside conduit, a device in the conference room router collecting 12 weeks of Sentinel development intelligence. A car scouting Hargrove Hall 4 days before the gala. A camera adjusted 3 weeks before the attack. And now, an FBI agent who was filing warrant applications through a personal channel because she didn't trust her own team. The picture was becoming a picture of something larger than one man, with a grudge and a stolen fortune. It was becoming a picture of infrastructure, patience, a system that had been built over 18 months and was still running. He was still at the window when his phone buzzed. Lily, a text, forum post, 18 months ago. Security Tech Forum, anonymous username asking specific technical questions about Harlow-style authentication architecture. I traced the IP. Service area is Newport RI, but there's a second account. Same forum, related questions, different IP. Dad, I need to show you this. He walked back to where she was sitting. The second IP didn't resolve to Newport. Lily had the screen ready when he got there, the browser showing a series of steps she'd walked through, methodically, each one documented in a side note so she could reconstruct the logic if someone asked her to. She'd found the second account's posts first, cross-referenced them with the first account's timing and subject matter, established that the two accounts were asking related but distinct questions about the same system, and then traced the IP through the forum's inadequately protected registration data. The second IP resolved to a commercial internet provider, servicing a section of Providence. Not Newport. Not anywhere near Newport. Providence. The second account was asking broader questions, Lily said, not as specific as the first. More about general authentication frameworks for financial security systems. But the subject overlap with the first account is significant. They're not talking to each other in the forum. They're working on the same problem from different angles. Ryan looked at the screen. When were these posts? The Newport posts are from 18 months ago. The Providence posts start 16 months ago and continue up until about 6 months back. Then they stop. 6 months ago. 6 months ago is when the conference room device was likely being sourced and prepared for installation, Gregory said from behind them. He had appeared quietly in the way Gregory had of materializing when information was being discussed. If whoever posted those Providence questions had what they needed by 6 months ago, they'd have stopped asking, Ryan said. The Newport posts started before Aldridge established his identity there. 4 months before, Lily said. If the first forum account is Aldridge or someone working for him, they were doing the research before Newport was set up. But the Providence account started 2 months after the Newport one. She looked at Ryan. Which means Providence knew what Newport was doing. Or Providence started because of Newport. Or they've been coordinating from the beginning and Newport and Providence are two parts of the same operation, Gregory said. Which means removing Aldridge doesn't necessarily remove the Providence component. The room was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of quiet that accompanied an unwelcome conclusion that everyone had arrived at simultaneously. Lily said, I tried to trace the Providence IP further. The service area is a commercial zone on Fountain Street. I can't get a specific address from the public data. I'd need something more, she paused. But I can cross-reference commercial business registrations in that service area using state records. If the Providence person was operating any kind of business from that location, it would be in the public registry, Ryan said. Do it? She was already doing it. He watched her navigate the Rhode Island Secretary of State's business database with the efficient certainty of someone who had done this kind of cross-referencing before, which she had on smaller and less consequential things. He thought about the AP history essay. He thought about the Bristol Fall Festival he'd promised her 2 weeks ago. That had become a hotel room and a federal investigation. She would forgive him for that. She'd probably already forgiven him, she said very quietly, in the voice she used when something landed differently than she expected. Dad. He looked at the screen. She had found a business registration. Commercial suite on Fountain Street. A consulting firm registered 16 months ago, 2 principals listed. One of them was a data security analyst with a professional background that matched the forum posting timeline exactly. The name on the registration was Brian Sutton. Ryan read the name twice. Said it once, quietly, to make it real. Same name as one of Clark's agents, Lily said. She was being very careful with her voice. I checked the public records. Same age. The timeline matches someone who went into federal for enforcement and kept something running on the side or built something separately before the federal role. She paused. It might be coincidence, Ryan said. It's not coincidence. I know. She closed 2 of the tabs. That's why I called you instead of Gregory. He stood up, thought about the information he was now holding and what it required of him. Clark had filed the amended warrant application herself because she didn't trust someone on her team. She'd looked at Ryan when she said it. She knew something she hadn't said in the room. Either she already suspected Sutton, which meant she was managing it and had been managing it, and what she needed was confirmation she couldn't get through official channels. Or she didn't know yet, and he was about to give her something that would change everything about how the next 12 hours moved. Either way, he couldn't get this information to Clark through Clark's normal channels. Not with Sutton's name on it, he said. Don't tell Gregory yet. Don't tell Sandra. This goes to Clark directly and only to Clark, and we need to figure out how to do that without it going through the team, Lily said. She gave you a card. The card has the official field office number, Lily said. People have personal phones. He looked at her. She looked back with the expression that said she had already thought of the next 3 steps and was waiting for him to catch up. He called Keel. Thomas Keel answered on the second ring. Unhurried. As if he'd been expecting it, Ryan said, Brian Sutton. And there was a silence that was 3 seconds long and contained considerable information. Keel said, Where did you get that name? Ryan told him. Keel was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. I've had Sutton as a person of interest for 6 weeks, Keel said. I hadn't confirmed the Providence address. I was still working the Newport angle and the forum posts were in FIQ to trace. He paused. How old is your daughter? 15? The silence this time had a different quality than the previous ones. Right, Keel said. So, Sutton has been with Clark's team for 2 years. He was assigned to the Aldridge federal warrant case 11 months ago, which is approximately when the Providence business was registered. Before that, he worked financial crimes in Boston. His voice dropped a fraction. Not in volume. In the specific register of someone stating something they'd verified and still wished wasn't true. If Sutton is on Clark's team and Sutton is connected to Aldridge's operation, then every communication we've had with Clark's team has had a leak, Ryan said. Including the amended warrant application she filed this afternoon. She filed it herself? Yes, a pause. Then she knows something. Or suspects something close enough to act on. Keel exhaled once. You need her personal number. Not the field office. I can get it. Give me 10 minutes. Ryan waited in the hallway, outside the conference room. Gregory's technical team had arrived and were moving equipment toward the stairs. The building was beginning to shift toward the evening rhythm, people leaving in 1s and 2s, the daytime energy draining toward the smaller crew that worked late. Lily came and stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She had her phone in her hand and was looking at it, but not at the screen. After a while she said, "If Sutton has been reporting to Aldridge for 11 months, everything Clark's team found, everything they decided, everything they planned about the warrant case, Aldridge has known it as fast as Clark knew it, yes. Which means Aldridge wasn't hiding from the investigation. He was watching it, yes, and the gala wasn't just about Sandra. It was about testing what happened when something went wrong. Whether the investigation would move faster. Whether new people would get involved." She looked at her phone. He wanted to see what the system did when it got poked. Ryan looked at her. "That's a good read, is it right?" He thought about it. A man who had run Pinnacle's financial infrastructure for 20 years, who had moved $170 million through enough accounts to keep federal investigators busy for 3 years, who had established a clean identity in Newport and waited while his inside man in the FBI shaped the investigation around him. A man like that didn't make moves without understanding the full system he was operating inside. "It's right," he said. Lily looked at her phone again. "Then he knows we're here. He knows someone intervened at the gala. He knows Vanguard's contractors are in custody. He'll find out about the warrant application when Sutton tells him, which he probably already has." Ryan looked at the end of the hallway. "What he doesn't know is that we know about Sutton. How long until he figures that out? Depends on how fast Clark moves once we get her the information." His phone buzzed. Keel. A contact card. Below it, "She doesn't know I have this number. Use it carefully." Ryan looked at the number, looked at Lily, looked at the number again. Then he wrote the text to Sharon Clark's personal phone that he couldn't take back once he sent it. The text that would either confirm what she already suspected or hand her something she hadn't known, and either way would require her to move faster than warrant applications normally moved. He told her his name, told her Keel had given him the number, told her he had information she needed before the warrant went forward, told her not to discuss it with her team. He sent it. Lily said, Now we wait. The response came in 4 minutes. "I know who you are," where he told her the hotel. "Lobby. 1 hour," she said. 45 minutes. Sharon Clark arrived in 42. She came through the Biltmore lobby in civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket, no badge visible, the kind of deliberately unreadable appearance that was its own kind of professional signal. She found Ryan at a corner table away from the main desk, and sat down without ordering anything, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent the drive over deciding how much of her reaction to let show. She landed on very little. Ryan laid it out. All of it. The Providence address, the business registry, Sutton's name, Keel's confirmation that he'd had Sutton as a person of interest for 6 weeks, the timeline that put the Providence Forum posts 16 months ago, 2 months after the Newport posts began, which meant the operations architecture had existed before its operator was fully in position. Clark listened without interrupting. Not the polite listening of someone waiting their turn. The operational listening of someone building a parallel structure in their head in real time, assembling the pieces into a picture she'd been trying to complete for longer than this conversation. When he finished, she said, "How did your daughter find the registry filing?" She traced the forum IP, found the service area in Providence, and ran a cross-reference on commercial business registrations in that service area using publicly available state records. Clark looked at the table. "She's 15, I'm aware, a beat. Then, Sutton was assigned to the Aldridge case because he requested it. Financial crimes experience, prior work on offshore account tracing. He made a strong case for inclusion." She stopped. Something moved through her expression that wasn't surprise but was the specific fatigue of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion they'd been refusing to have. "He wrote the initial threat assessment memo that shaped how we prioritized the investigation. Ryan, let that sit. If Sutton wrote the assessment, and Sutton was connected to Aldridge, then the assessment had been shaped to point the investigation in the directions Aldridge wanted it to go, and away from the directions that led too close too fast." "How far along is the warrant application?" Ryan said. My team filed the preliminary yesterday at 5 p.m. through the normal channel. The amended version, the one I filed myself this afternoon, goes to a separate judge this evening. She looked at him. If Sutton knows we have new information suggesting a second actor in Teller in Providence, he'll know we're looking at him. And he'll know before I have enough to move on him formally. So we give him nothing. We give him nothing, she agreed, her voice carrying the flatness of someone who had already made the decision and was confirming it out loud to hear how it held. I'll handle the Sutton component separately. New channel, people I trust outside his reach. She paused. I need the forum IP data, the registry filing, the timestamp chain your daughter built. She already has a file ready. Clark's mouth moved in a way that almost became something before it settled back into professional neutrality. Your daughter has a file ready to send to an FBI agent's personal email. She had it queued before I sent you the text, Ryan said. She figured that's where this was going. Clark looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Ryan with an expression that had shed some of the professional layer. Get her a mentor, Clark said. Someone with the appropriate credentials. Someone who can make sure she uses this for the right purposes and knows what she's building toward. She keeps outpacing the mentors, Ryan said. Then find her a better one. She stood. Send the file. I'll be in touch when the warrant comes through. Don't tell Gregory or Sandra about Sutton until I say so. She left. Ryan sat at the corner table for another few minutes, finishing a coffee he'd barely touched. He thought about Diane again. Not the grief of it, which was always there underneath everything, but the specific thought of what she would say right now if she was sitting across from him in this hotel lobby with the information they'd assembled over the past 2 days. She would make a list. She would find the gap between what they knew and what they needed. She would look at the gap and say that's the work, and she would mean it without drama. The way she meant most things, the gap right now was time. Clark needed time to close both ends simultaneously. Aldridge in Newport and Sutton in Providence, both before either one could alert the other. The device in the conference room router was the thread that connected them, the thing that, if they traced it properly, could lead from the conference room to the Fountain Street suite, for Sutton knew anyone was looking. He went back. Upstairs. Lily was where he'd left her. She looked up. He nodded once. She sent the file. They went to bed at 11, or rather, Lily was told to go to bed at 11, and Ryan sat at the small desk in his room with a notepad and worked through the timing in the way he'd worked through tactical problems before operations, backward from the objective, identifying the dependencies, finding where the sequence could break. The objective was simultaneous. Both ends at once. Newport and Providence closing at the same moment so neither side could warn the other. The dependency was the device trace. If Clark's technical team could identify the receiving address from the transmission signal, they could stage on Fountain Street at the same time they staged on Newport. If the trace took too long, or if Sutton figured out something was wrong before Clark could move, the whole sequence broke. He wrote the timing on the notepad. Thought about it. Turned the notepad over. Then he went to sleep, which was not the same as resting, but was what was available. Ryan walked fast, not running, but the kind of walking that meant something. Providence at 6:20 in the morning was quiet enough that his footsteps were audible on the pavement, that particular early city sound of a place still deciding to be awake. He had his phone to his ear and Lily was still on the line, and he was doing two things at once. Listening to her and running the new information through the part of his brain trained to find the load-bearing elements of a situation fast. 18 months. The forum post was 18 months old. Aldridge had established his Newport identity 14 months ago. 4 months before Aldridge was in position, someone in Providence was already asking technical questions about Harlow's authentication architecture, which meant the operation had a longer runway than anyone had assumed. Which meant the person who'd started it, who'd done the groundwork before Aldridge even arrived, was not working for Aldridge the way an employee worked for an employer. Or rather, Aldridge was not the origin point. He said, the billing address. What's on the suite? Lily said. It's registered to a consulting firm. 2 employees according to the state business registry. One of them is listed as a data security analyst. A pause. The kind where she was reading. Dad. The name of the second person on that registry is Brian Sutton. He stopped walking on a sidewalk in Providence at 6:21 a.m. He stopped moving entirely and the city continued around him, and he made himself say the name out loud quietly to confirm he had heard it correctly. Brian Sutton, the same name as one of Clark's agents, Lily said. Her voice was the careful, deliberate voice of someone who understood the weight of what they were saying and was measuring it before setting it down. I checked. Same age. Same general professional timeline. The years. Line up with someone who went into federal law enforcement and kept something running separately. Or built something before the federal role that never fully stopped. She paused. I might be wrong. It might be coincidence. Ryan started walking again. It's not coincidence, I know. Don't say this to anyone until I figure out how to get it to Clark without going through Clark's normal channels. I know, she said again. That's why I called you instead of Gregory. He had 30 minutes before Lily needed Gregory to know he was on his way back. He used 15 of them standing outside the hotel on the Kennedy Plaza side, watching the fountain that wasn't running in October, thinking about how information moved and who it moved through, and what happened when the person responsible for receiving it was also the thing you needed to protect it from. Keel had said Clark didn't know yet about the second person in Newport, but Keel had not said anything about a second person in Providence, which meant either Keel didn't know about Sutton or Keel knew and hadn't led with it, and both of those possibilities had different implications for how much Ryan could trust what Keel had told him at that coffee shop table. 40 minutes ago. He called Keel back. Keel answered on the second ring. Unhurried, as if he'd been expecting it, Ryan said, Brian Sutton, a silence that was 3 seconds long and contained considerable information. Keel said, Where did you get that name? My daughter found a commercial registry filing this morning. Providence address, data security consulting firm. Sutton is listed as a principal. Another silence. Shorter this time. She traced the forum IP. She traced the forum IP. Keel made a sound that was not quite a laugh, not dismissive. More the sound of someone who had just recalibrated an assessment they'd been comfortable with and found they needed more room. I've had Sutton as a person of interest for 6 weeks. I hadn't confirmed the Providence address. I was still working the Newport angle and the forum posts were in my queue. He paused. How old is your daughter? 15? This time the silence had a different quality entirely. Right, Keel said. So Sutton has been with Clark's team for 2 years. He was assigned to the Aldridge federal warrant case 11 months ago, which is around the time the Providence business was registered. Before that, he worked financial crimes in Boston. His voice dropped a fraction. Not in volume. In the specific register of someone stating something they'd verified and still wished wasn't true. If Sutton is on Clark's team, and Sutton is connected to Aldridge's operation, then every communication we've had with Clark's team has had a leak in it since the case was reopened, including the warrant application. Yes, Ryan looked at the dry fountain. Dead leaves collected in the basin, pushed by the overnight wind into a loose spiral at the center. He said, We need to get to Clark without Sutton knowing we're getting to Clark. You'd need her personal number, not the work line. Do you have it? A pause that meant yes before he said yes. I'll send it to you. Give me 10 minutes. I want to make sure I'm giving you the right one. She rotates her personal number periodically for exactly the kind of reason we're currently dealing with. Ryan went upstairs. Lily was at the small desk by the window with 3 screens open across her laptop and her phone, and a tablet she'd borrowed from Gregory the previous afternoon and not yet returned. She looked up when he came in, and he could see she'd been waiting to look up, that she'd heard the door and been holding still by an act of will. He told her what Keel had said. She processed it quickly in the way she processed things that confirmed something she'd already suspected rather than contradicted something she'd believed. Her eyes went to the tablet and back. If Sutton was on Clark's team for 2 years and has been connected to Aldridge's operation for at least 18 months, she said, then Aldridge has had access to the federal warrant case from before it was formally reopened. From when they were deciding whether to reopen it, she was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Providence was becoming fully morning, the light changing from grey to something with more color in it, the bay catching it differently than the buildings did. That means Aldridge knew the investigation's shape before the investigators did, she said. Which means Newport wasn't a hiding place. Newport was a waiting place. He was comfortable there because he knew exactly what the warrant case was doing and exactly how fast it wasn't moving. Ryan sat on the edge of the desk. Until the gala, until you, Lily said. Then she corrected herself with the flat accuracy of someone who had decided not to minimize her own contribution to something that had put her in a hotel room away from school for 4 days. Until us, his phone buzzed. Keel. A contact card for Sharon Clark's personal cell. Below it a single line. She doesn't know I have this number. Use it carefully. Ryan looked at the number. Thought about it for 30 seconds, the way he thought about things that required him to commit before he understood the full consequence. Then he wrote Clark, a text that said his name, that said Keel had given him the number, that said he had information she needed before the warrant went forward, and that she should not discuss receiving his message with her team. He sent it. He put the phone face down on the desk and looked at Lily, and she looked at him, and they waited in the particular silence of people who have done the thing that cannot be undone and are now in the gap between action and consequence, which was its own kind of work even though it looked like nothing. The response came in 4 minutes. I know who you are. Where he told her the hotel, lobby. 1 hour, she said. 45 minutes. Sharon Clark arrived in 42. She came through the Biltmore lobby in civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket. No badge visible, the kind of deliberately unreadable appearance that was its own kind of professional signal. She found Ryan at a corner table away from the main desk and sat down without ordering anything, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent the drive over deciding how much of her reaction to let show. She landed on very little. Ryan laid it out without ceremony. The Providence address, the business registry filing, Sutton's name. Keel's confirmation that he'd had Sutton as a person of interest for 6 weeks without confirming the address. The timeline that put the Providence Forum posts beginning 16 months ago, 2 months after the Newport posts, running until 6 months back when the conference room device installation was being planned. The registration date for the consulting firm matching within weeks of Sutton joining Clark's team on the Aldridge case. Clark listened without interrupting. Not polite listening. The operational listening of someone building a parallel structure in real time, assembling pieces into a picture she'd been trying to complete from a different angle. When he finished, she said, "How did your daughter find the registry filing?" She traced the forum IP, found the service area in Providence, and cross-referenced business registrations using state public records. Clark looked at the table. "She's 15, I'm aware, a beat." Then, in a voice that had shed some of its flatness, Sutton was assigned to the Aldridge case because he requested it. He made a strong case for inclusion, financial crimes background, prior work on offshore or account tracing. He wrote the initial threat assessment memo that shaped how we prioritized the investigation. She stopped. Something moved through her expression, the specific fatigue of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion they'd been refusing to look at directly, because looking would require acting. If he shaped the assessment, he shaped what we looked for. And what we didn't? How far along is the warrant application? The amended version I filed myself this afternoon goes to a separate judge this evening. Sutton has not seen it and does not know it exists. She looked at him steadily. If Sutton figures out we have information placing him at a Providence address connected to Aldridge's operation, before I have enough to move on. Him formally, he alerts Aldridge, and everything moves underground again. So we give him nothing. We give him nothing, she agreed. The flatness back and carrying the weight of someone who had made a decision that was going to cost something personal, Later, when there was time to feel it. I need the full file your daughter built. Forum timestamps, IP trace documents, registry filing, the cross-reference logic she used. Ryan said, "She has it queued." Clark's mouth moved towards something before settling back into professional neutrality. Your daughter has the file queued. She figured. That's where this was going when she found Sutton's name. Clark stood. Send it to my personal email. I'll be in touch when the warrant comes through. Don't tell Gregory or Sandra about Sutton until I say so. She paused at the edge of leaving. Get your daughter a mentor, someone with the appropriate credentials, who can give what she does a proper framework. She outpaces the mentors. Then find her a harder one. She left without looking back. Ryan sat at the corner table and finished a coffee he'd barely touched, and thought about Diane, not the grief of it, but the specific practical thought of what she would say right now. She would make a list. She would find the gap between what they knew and what they needed. She would call the gap the work, and mean it without any drama around it. The gap right now was time. Everything depended on Clark closing both ends before either end knew the other was closing. He went upstairs and told Lily to send the file, and she sent it before he finished the sentence, because she'd had it queued since 6:45. The day that followed had the specific quality of days that were full of motion and produced nothing visible. Clark was working in a channel Ryan couldn't see. Keel had gone quiet, which meant he was doing something productive with the time they'd bought. Gregory was at Harlow, managing the technical documentation the amended warrant would need. Sandra was in a board communication meeting Ryan wasn't part of because the board needed a version of events that was true, but carefully incomplete until there was something to complete it with. Ryan spent 2 hours doing something that looked like nothing and was actually the thing he was best at. He walked Harlow's building, all floors Sandra had authorized him to access. He took the stairs because stairwells showed you things about a building that elevator banks didn't, the service infrastructure, the camera blind spots, the places where the security design had been built around assumptions that were no longer safe to make. He found 3 things Gregory hadn't flagged. He photographed them and sent the photos with brief notes, and Gregory responded with single-word acknowledgements that meant he was already on it. Lunch was the second-floor cafe. Ryan told Lily to eat a real meal, and she complied without much argument, which meant she was either genuinely hungry or had decided this particular hill wasn't worth defending. She had a grilled cheese. He had the soup of the day, which turned out to be something with sweet potato that he hadn't expected to like and did. Lily said, "How did Diane handle waiting?" Ryan looked at her. The question was direct in the way Lily's questions sometimes were, when she'd been building toward them for a while, and had finally stopped approaching from the side. She made lists, he said. Everything she knew, everything she didn't know. The gap between the 2 lists was what she worked on. Lily considered this. That's basically what I've been doing, I know. You got it from her. I got it from watching you. I got it from her. She looked at her grilled cheese for a moment. Then, without looking up, she sounds like someone worth getting things from. It was the kind of thing Lily said sometimes, oblique and precise at the same time. The thing she couldn't quite say directly, but couldn't leave entirely unsaid either. Ryan understood it as the version of, "I miss her," that a 15-year-old produced when she was trying to hold it together in a building full of people she'd known for 4 days and didn't want to come apart in front of. He said she was, and that was all, because the cafe was not the place, and the moment understood its own limits. Clark called at 3:17. "The amended application is filed," she said. "Separate judge, separate clerk. I handled it myself. The judge is reviewing it now." A pause. "There's more." Ryan moved to the stairwell on 18, Sutton, Clark said. "I pulled his banking records through a channel I trust outside the case team. 11 months ago, 4 weeks after he was isolated to the Aldridge case, he received a wire transfer of $90,000 from an LLC in Connecticut. The LLC dissolved 30 days after the transfer." She paused. The dissolution filing was notarized by the same Newark law firm that Gregory identified in the Pinnacle adjacent trust documents, the same law firm. The thread ran from Aldridge's offshore trust through the Newark firm to Cascade Ridge Consulting to Vanguard. And now from the same firm through a Connecticut LLC to Sutton's personal account. Not coincidence. Architecture. He's been paid, Ryan said. He's been paid, Clark confirmed, which means I can move on him. But not until after we move on Aldridge, because if Sutton's account gets flagged before Newport executes, he alerts Aldridge, and we're back to a ghost with a new identity and another 18-month runway, Ryan said. How long until the Newport warrant comes through? Tonight or first thing tomorrow morning? The judge has everything he needs. She paused. I need the device trace before I can stage on Fountain Street. My technical team has been in the floor 12 room since 9 this morning, working the transmission signal from the conference room router unit. If they can identify the receiving address, we stage simultaneously. Newport and Providence in the same window. And if the trace takes longer than tonight, then we pull the device, take what we have on Aldridge, and move on Newport alone. Sutton becomes a separate operation. Her voice was flat in the way of someone who had war-gamed both outcomes and knew which one she preferred. But I think we get the trace tonight. 2 devices transmitting to the same address gives us a cleaner triangulation. Ryan said, What do you need from us? Stay where you are. Don't move independently. Don't give Sutton any indication that anything has shifted in the last 24 hours. He submitted a supplemental memo on the gala contractors this morning through normal channels. Sandra's office needs to acknowledge it on the usual timeline. I'll tell her. Good. A pause. Aldridge hasn't moved. Newport surveillance has eyes on the Thames Street address. As of 2 hours ago, he was still in the suite. He hasn't moved because Sutton told him the investigation was moving slowly, Ryan said. As long as Sutton believes nothing has changed, Aldridge believes nothing has changed, which is exactly why the next 12 hours are the ones that matter, Clark said. She ended the call. Ryan stood in the stairwell for a few minutes after, 18 floors of painted concrete. The mechanical hum of the building somewhere below. A paper coffee cup on a landing 2 floors down that had been there since morning. He was thinking about Aldridge in the Thames Street suite, making the same calculations Ryan was making. Trying to determine how much of his operation had been exposed and whether the exposure was survivable. A man who had run a major bank's financial infrastructure for 20 years did not make those calculations emotionally. He made them the way he'd made every financial decision, with a model, assigned probabilities, contingency branches. The model currently said, 1 operation failed, 4 contractors arrested and silent, lawyers in place and funded. Investigation moving slowly because Sutton shaped it to move slowly. The person who intervened at the gala was a freelance security contractor, a complication but not a structural threat. The model did not yet include the forum trace. The Providence registry, the amended warrant Sutton hadn't seen. The technical team working on floor 12, tracing a signal Aldridge didn't know anyone was looking for. When the model updated, Aldridge would move. Ryan needed Clark to move first. He went back to 18. At 5 o'clock, Sandra called a small meeting. Ryan, Gregory, Lily, Sandra in the working room with the unremarkable window. No tablets, no screens. Sandra stood at the whiteboard and wrote 3 words. Project Sentinel. Status. Gregory said the development timeline had not been compromised at the master key level. 12 weeks of keystroke data from the conference room router had captured architecture discussions and implementation debates, but not the final cryptographic keys, which lived on an air-gapped system that the conference room network could not reach. So what they have, Sandra said, is enough to understand the system. Not enough to replicate it, correct. But understanding the system is enough to know how to attack it during the integration window. When institutions migrate to the new protocol, there's a transition period where both old and new systems run simultaneously. If someone understood Sentinel's architecture in detail, they could target that window specifically. How close are we to public announcement? 6 weeks, Gregory said. The protocol is complete. Final testing is running now. Sandra looked at the whiteboard. Then they have 6 weeks to use what they have. And if the Newport arrest removes Aldridge, the question is whether whoever holds the technical intelligence can still act on it without him, Ryan said. The Providence connection predates Aldridge's arrival by 4 months. The technical foundation was built before Aldridge had a base. Which means the technical threat may not depend on Aldridge at all. The room was quiet with the quality of quiet that accompanied an unwelcome conclusion. Everyone had arrived at simultaneously. Lily, who had been listening from the end of the table in the way she listened when she was deciding when to say what she knew, looked at Ryan. He gave her a small nod. She said, "I know who the Providence person is. But Gregory, I need you to trust me for the next few hours and not ask me to say the name yet." She looked at Gregory directly, not apologetically. "There's a reason we can't say it in this room right now. Agent Clark is managing it. When she says it's clear, we'll tell you everything." Gregory looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at Ryan. Ryan said, "A few hours." "It's the right call," Gregory said. "All right." 2 words carrying some weight but no argument, which was its own kind of professional quality. Sandra said, "What's our exposure between now and when Clark moves?" "Limited," Gregory said. "Air-gapped keys are safe. The architecture data they may have is a problem but contained. The real exposure would be if someone attempted direct physical access to the backup systems." He stopped, then started again in a slightly different register. Sandra, she looked at him, the maintenance contractor, 3 months ago. Routine server room maintenance. We used a new firm because Hendricks and Associates had a scheduling conflict for that window. Sandra went very still. "They were in the floor 12 server room for 4 hours," Gregory said. "I was there for most of it." I had to take a board call at 2 o'clock and I left them with Marcus from Atif for approximately 40 minutes. He looked at the whiteboard and not at the words on it. Floor 12 houses the secondary authentication systems and the redundancy layer for Sentinel's integration protocols. Not the master keys, but the integration layer, Sandra said quietly. If they installed something during those 40 minutes, a passive monitor, a sleeper access point, anything that could read network traffic on that segment, Gregory was already on his personal phone. "I need to call Marcus right now," Ryan said. "Personal phone only." "Nothing through the Harlow network." Gregory nodded and stepped to the corner and spoke for 3 minutes, in a voice too low to follow clearly. When he came back, his expression confirmed what the room had been half expecting of from the moment he'd started the sentence. "Marcus checked Bay 7, Gregory said. "There's a device. Small, professional installation. Attached to the secondary routing hardware." Sandra stood at the window. "The one without the water view. The one that showed the side of another building going dark as the afternoon moved toward evening without asking permission." "How long has it been active?" she said. "Based on what Marcus described, the installation matches the maintenance window, 3 months ago. 3 months of traffic from the integration layer." Sandra said, "Yes, which means 3 months of Sentinel's integration architecture flowing somewhere." "Yes," Ryan said. "Don't remove it." Everyone looked at him. "If we remove it, the person receiving that feed knows we found it. They know we're tracking inward. Right now they think it's invisible. If Clark can trace the transmission signal from that device to the receiving address, we get Providence at the same time as Newport, both ends closing before either side. Can warn the other." He looked at Sandra. "But it requires leaving it in place until Clark is ready," Sandra said. "The master keys don't touch that network segment." "Correct," Gregory said. "And nothing operationally sensitive goes through it between now and when Clark moves. I can lock floor 12 and flag the segment. Nothing touches it without my direct authorization." Sandra looked at Ryan with the directness she'd had since the first morning at the hotel. Not asking him to make the decision. Asking him to confirm she'd read the logic correctly. "If the timing slips," she said, "we pull the device and take what we have on Aldridge alone. But if it holds, we close both ends in the same moment." She made the decision the way she made all of them. Quickly, fully, without the performance of deliberation. "Tell Clark about the device. Tonight, Ryan was already on his phone. Clark arrived at Harlow at 8:45 through the service entrance on the Exchange Street side, which Ryan had suggested because the main lobby logged all visitors and he no longer trusted whose logs those went into. She was still in civilian clothes. Two agents came with her that Ryan hadn't seen before, not Paulson or Reyes, not anyone from the regular case team. People she'd pulled from completely outside the Aldridge investigation's normal chain. She looked at Gregory's photographs of the Bay 7 device and said nothing for a moment in the way of someone reading a document carefully before responding to it. Professional installation, she said finally. This is the same network layer as the conference room router unit or broader. Gregory said, broader. It's on the routing hardware itself, which means it sees everything moving through that segment. Not just keystroke data, network traffic patterns, authentication handshakes, timing data from integration tests. All of it, transmission range. Not sufficient for Newport. The signal is going somewhere in the metro area. Providence, Ryan said. Almost certainly, Gregory confirmed. Clark made a call that lasted 7 minutes. She came back with the expression of someone who had just placed a final piece and was looking at what the completed picture required of her. My technical team has been in floor 12 since this morning, working the transmission trace from the original conference room device, she said. When I tell them about the Bay 7 unit, they can incorporate both signal sources. 2 transmission points gives a cleaner triangulation on the receiving address. She looked at Sandra. I need them to work through the night. I need your authorization for unrestricted access to floor 12 until the trace is complete, Sandra said. You have it. The Newport warrant came through 40 minutes ago, Clark said. I was waiting to hear about the device before I set timing on execution. She looked around the room. If the technical team has the receiving address by midnight, I can stage simultaneously. Newport and Providence in the same window, both before either side has time to alert the other, Ryan said. What's your confidence on the address? High. 2 signal sources triangulating to the same metropolitan area, and we already have a candidate address from the registry trace. The technical work will confirm rather than discover. She paused. I need everyone in this room to maintain normal behavior until I give the signal. Sutton submitted a supplemental memo to Sandra's office this afternoon through the normal channel, Sandra said. I'll acknowledge it in the morning. Same timing as his previous submissions. Good. Clark looked at the table. She looked at it the way people looked at things when they were actually looking at something else. He's always been very thorough, she said. In 11 months on this case, he never missed a filing deadline. She stopped. I want you to know I would have found this eventually. Without the forum trace. Without the registry filing. She paused. It would have taken longer. Long enough for things to go differently. Nobody in the room said anything to that. It was the kind of statement that didn't need a response. That was its own response to something unspoken. Clark gathered her agents and moved toward the service entrance. At the door, she stopped and looked back at Ryan. When this is over, I want a full debrief, she said. You, Lily Keel. Everything you built from the forum trace forward. The methodology, the sourcing, the sequence of it. She paused. I want to understand how she got there, Ryan said. She'll tell you it was just Google and state records. I know, Clark said. That's exactly what I want to understand. She left. The building went quiet after that in the way. Buildings went quiet when the activity that had been filling them finally stopped moving. Gregory's technical team was working on floor 12. The regular staff had been gone for hours. Sandra was in her office on 22 handling board communications. Ryan and Lily were in the working room on 18 with the window that showed the side of another building, now fully dark, and reflecting the room back at them. Lily had her laptop open. Not the AP history essay. She was building the complete timeline. She'd been assembling piece by piece across the week, every element documented with source and timestamp, the 18-month picture of an operation that had been patient and methodical and very nearly invisible until a security camera stopped moving and noticed that cameras were supposed to move. Ryan watched her work for a while without saying anything. Then, "You should be in school. I should technically be in bed," Lily said. "It's almost 10, that too," she kept typing. Then, without looking up, "When this is over, what do we do?" He thought about the question. The literal version and the other version both present in the 3 words. "Go home," he said. "You finish your essay. I go back to the Kellerman kitchen. The oak timetable. The oak timetable, yes." She was quiet. Then, and Sandra, the name landed in the room with the weight of a question pretending not to be one. Which was, Ryan thought, exactly how Lily asked the questions that mattered most to her. "What about Sandra?" he said. "I don't know. I'm just asking what about Sandra. She hit a key. She's not what I expected when I thought about what a person like her would be like." "What did you expect?" "Someone more finished. Like she'd already figured everything out, and the rest of us were just slower." She looked at her screen. "But she makes decisions fast and you can see her making them. She doesn't hide it." A pause. "Mom was like that. You could see her thinking." Ryan looked at the dark window, their reflections in the glass, him and Lily, the room behind them, the city invisible beyond it. He said, "Yeah, she is." Lily went back to her timeline, and the room was the sound of her typing, which was the sound of someone who had just said what she meant about two different people at once, and was satisfied to let it be. Clark called at 10:47. Her voice had the quality of someone delivering the result of a calculation that had taken all day and was now complete. "The technical team has the receiving address," she said. "Fountain Street Commercial Suite. Both devices, the conference room router unit and the Bay 7 installation, resolved to the same location within a 12-meter margin." A pause. "It's the address from your daughter's registry filing," Ryan said. "Confirmed. Confirmed. I have teams staged at Newport and at Fountain Street. We execute simultaneously at 11:15. Another pause. "Sutton is at the Fountain Street address. The technical team picked up his device on the building's network 20 minutes ago. He's been there since 9 p.m., Ryan said. "He knows something changed. He knows the warrant application is late clearing the normal channel. It should have come through by this afternoon and it didn't, which tells him something moved outside his visibility." Her voice was controlled in the specific way of someone managing a professional betrayal that hadn't yet had time to settle into what it was going to become. "He's calculating. That's why 11:15 and not tomorrow morning. What do you need from us?" "Nothing. Stay where you are. This is my operation now." A pause. "Tell your daughter she did good work." She ended the call. Ryan set his phone on the table. Lily had stopped typing. She was looking at him with the expression she used when she already knew the answer and was waiting for him to say it. 11:15, he said. She looked at the clock on her laptop screen. 22 minutes. She closed the timeline document she'd been building all evening and opened the AP history essay instead. Ryan watched her do this and understood it for what it was. The thing she did when she'd done everything she could do and needed to put her hands on something with a clear endpoint and a rubric and a right answer. The essay was controllable. The next 22 minutes were not. He didn't tell her to stop or to come away from the screen. He stayed where he was and let the minutes move. Sandra came in at 11 o'clock, from wherever she'd been on 22. She looked at Ryan and he gave her the short version in 3 sentences. "Newport and Providence, 11:15. Clark has it." She sat down. Gregory appeared from the direction of the stairs a few minutes later with the look of someone who had been keeping himself useful elsewhere and had run out of elsewhere. He sat at the far end of the table. Nobody spoke. The 4 of them in a room on the 18th floor of a glass building in Providence, while 2 federal operations staged 17 miles away and 1 mile away respectively, and the city moved around all of it completely unaware. Gregory said at 11:12. "I feel like we should be doing something," Ryan said. "We already did it." At 11:14, Sandra's phone lit up with a text from Clark. 1 word. "Moving." The room was quiet with the specific quality of quiet that came when you'd been holding something for a long time and had just set it down and hadn't yet decided what to do with your hands. somewhere on Thames Street in Newport. Agents were approaching a commercial suite, where a man who had moved $170 million through enough jurisdictions to occupy federal investigators for 3 years, was about to discover that the investigation he'd been watching from the inside had been watching him from the outside for longer than he'd known. And, somewhere on Fountain Street, a quarter mile from where they were sitting, another set of agents was approaching a different suite, where a man who had spent 2 years shaping a federal case was sitting at a laptop, with a late warrant application on his screen and a message draft open to a contact he was deciding whether to warn. Neither of them would have time to warn the other. That was the whole play. That had always been the whole play. From the moment Lily found the second IP address, and Ryan understood that both ends had to close at once or neither closing would hold. 11:23. Clark called. "Newport is secure," she said. Aldridge was in the suite. He'd been packing. Bag on the bed, a passport document set we're going to take apart carefully. But he was still there, a breath that was not quite a sigh. Fountain Street is secure. Sutton was at his workstation. He had Aldridge's contact information open and a message draft that had not been sent. Ryan said, "How close?" The draft was complete. He was in the decision of whether to send it when our people came through the door. Clark's voice had something in it that was going to become something more specific later when there was time to feel it properly. Right now it was just contained. "It's done," the room exhaled. Not dramatically. The specific release of held breath that happened when a thing that had been suspended in the air finally settled somewhere solid. Lily closed the AP history essay and looked at Ryan, and Ryan looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because neither of them needed to. Sandra sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular for a moment, in the way of someone who has just set down something very heavy and is taking stock of what it felt like to be without it. Gregory said, "It's done," Ryan said. "The arrest part is done. The rest of it takes months, but the part we were in the middle of, that part is done." Gregory left to coordinate with the technical team on floor 12, which would need to be formally processed by morning. Clark had sent 2 agents to secure the Bay 7 device and the conference room router unit as evidence. The building was settling toward empty in the way buildings settled when the thing that had been moving through them had stopped. Sandra looked at Ryan, then at Lily. Then at Ryan again. She said, "I owe you a significant apology." Ryan looked at her. "I told you this was a temporary consulting arrangement, and then I put you and your daughter in the middle of a federal investigation, an intelligence operation that had been running for 18 months, and decisions that required trusting me when you had very little basis to do so." She met his eyes without deflection. "That was more than I hired you for. You hired me to find out who was trying to hurt you. I hired you because you were the only person in a room full of people who moved toward the danger, instead of away from it." She paused. "There's a difference between those 2 things, and I want you to know I understand what that difference cost you both." He didn't argue with her because she was right, and she knew he knew it, and arguing would have made the statement smaller than it was. She said, "Lily." Lily looked up from the laptop she had reopened, the AP history essay visible on the screen again because she was Lily, and there was no more excuse. "There's a formal mentorship program I fund through the foundation associated with Harlow," Sandra said. "Young people in technology fields, specifically cybersecurity and systems analysis. It's not a scholarship. It's a working relationship, access to professionals, real projects in supervised contexts." She looked at Lily steadily. "I'd like to introduce you to the program director. No obligation, no pressure. But the person who traced 2 IP addresses and a state business registry in a single morning, using only publicly available information, should know that there are people who do this professionally and are very good at it, and who would find her genuinely interesting." Lily looked at Ryan. He said, "Your decision." Lily looked back at Sandra. "Would I still have to finish the AP history essay?" Sandra said, "Yes, then I'll think about it," Lily said. Both of them knew that meant yes. 3 weeks later, the AP history essay came back with a 93. 5 points deducted for late submission. Lily read the feedback twice, noted 3 things the teacher had missed in the analysis, and filed it without complaint. Ryan saw the grade on the kitchen table and said nothing about the 5 points because 93 was 93, and the week it had been written during was not a week that lent itself to quibbling about margins. The Kellerman kitchen was finished on a Tuesday. The oak was clean, and the joints were tight, and Mrs. Kellerman stood in her kitchen and ran her hand along the cabinet face and said it was exactly what she'd wanted, which was the only thing a client needed to say, and the only thing Ryan needed to hear. He drove home with the radio off, and the window cracked and felt the particular satisfaction of work completed that had required his full attention and produced something that would outlast the attention it took. The warrant for Aldridge moved through federal prosecution with the pace that federal prosecution moved, which was deliberate and unglamorous, and would take the better part of a year before a trial date was set. Sutton's case moved on a separate parallel track. Clark handled both with the thoroughness Ryan had come to expect from her and the personal restraint that the Sutton situation required, because betrayal from inside a team was a specific kind of damage that took longer to process than external threats did and couldn't be rushed without making it worse. Walter Haynes cooperated fully. His testimony formed a central pillar of the prosecution's case against Aldridge. The question of Patrick's continued treatment was resolved through a combination of Walter's cooperation agreement and a victim compensation framework that Clark navigated with more patience than the system typically rewarded. Patrick finished his treatment protocol in the spring. The outcome was better than the initial prognosis had suggested it might be. Not a guarantee, not a miracle. The kind of result that happened sometimes when the right people made the right decisions at the right moments, and when the wrong people were removed from the equation before they could do more damage than they'd already done. Ryan didn't know about Patrick's outcome until Sandra told him, which she did on a Wednesday afternoon in the Harlow offices, where he had come to measure the wall space in her office for the post table for the oak table. They had been discussing in the specific ongoing way of 2 people who had found a practical reason to keep a conversation going that neither of them was ready to end. He said, "That's good news," she said. "It is," and then she handed him a coffee and stood at the window looking out at the harbor, which was visible from 22 to, in a way it wasn't from 18, the full width of the bay catching the November light. They stood there for a while without talking about the table, or about anything else in particular, just the harbor and the light, and the particular quality of standing next to someone you had been through something with, which was different from standing next to someone you simply knew. Lily came to Harlow on a Saturday in November to meet the program director Sandra had arranged. Dr. Carol Whitfield, 51, system security researcher with a publication record that Lily had read 3/4 of before the meeting. The kind of person who asked 4 sharp questions before you'd finished answering the first one. Lily came out of the 2-hour meeting, looking the way she looked after a conversation that had required everything she had and given her back more than she'd brought in. She said to Ryan, who had been in the lobby reading a structural engineering magazine from the side table, "She wants me to look at a dataset," Ryan said. "What kind of dataset?" She said, "It would take me about a week to understand what I was looking at, and then I'd find the thing nobody else had found yet." Lily looked at her phone, where she'd been taking notes during the meeting. She said, "That's how she knows if someone is ready," Ryan said. "Are you ready?" Lily considered this with the seriousness it deserved, which was considerable. "I think I've been ready for a while," she said. "I just didn't have the right dataset." They drove back to the house in Brookhaven Heights in the truck with the transmission that hummed in the cold. The roof still needed replacing. The Kellerman check had covered November, but December was its own conversation. These were the facts of the life Ryan had built, and he had no complaints about them, which was not the same as having no desires, but was the more honest accounting of where he actually was. He pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always looked. The oak in the front yard had dropped most of its leaves. The porch light was on because he'd left it on out of habit, which was the kind of thing you did when you'd been leaving lights on for the same person for 5 years. And the habit had outlasted the need for it. Lily got out and went inside, and he sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. He thought about the night at Hargrove Hall, the burgundy vests, the camera that wasn't moving, the 40 seconds that had changed the shape of the next month and possibly more than that. He thought about what he'd said to Sandra on the first morning at the hotel, that they needed to move faster than Aldridge did, and how that had turned out to be true, in ways neither of them had fully understood when he said it. He thought about Diane. Not the grief of it, which was always there, underneath everything, the way a foundation was, underneath a house, present in everything the structure did and rarely visible. He thought about the specific thing of what she would say about all of it. She would say the data was the data, and you either read it or you didn't, and the people who got hurt were almost always the ones who decided not to look. She would say that looking was not the same as knowing was the necessary to do with what you saw. But it was the necessary first skipped it, because looking cost something, and they weren't sure they could afford to pay. She had always been willing to pay. Lily had gotten that from her. The willingness to look at a thing directly and say what it was, and then do the next thing the looking required. Ryan had gotten a lot of things from Diane, including the knowledge that some costs were not costs at all but investments, and that the difference only became visible later. When you could see what the paying had built. He got out of the truck, went inside. The house was warm. Lily was already in her room, probably at her laptop, probably looking at a dataset that was going to take her a week to understand, and less time than that to find the thing in it nobody else had found. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and thought about oak and finish options and the particular grain that worked best for a large working surface that needed to hold the full weight of someone who thought with their whole body when the problem was hard enough. Matte finish, simple lines, wide enough to spread things out. The kind of table that was built to last and didn't announce it. He thought about the way Sandra stood at a window when she was working something out, the quality of her stillness, which was not the stillness of someone who had stopped, but the stillness of someone moving very fast on the inside and had learned over many years to keep it off of her face. He thought about oak, about the grain of it, the way it took light in the morning, about the fact that he'd been thinking about this table for 3 weeks. In the specific way you thought about something you were looking forward to starting. He'd begin the drawings tomorrow. Outside, Brookhaven Heights was doing what it did on November evenings, which was go quiet in the specific way of a neighborhood that had made its peace with the cold and was settling in for the seasons. The oak in the front yard was down to its last few leaves. The porch light was on. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and his notepad and the house around him and thought about all of it for a while. The shapes of things, what they'd been a month ago, and what they were now. What they might be in a month more. Some costs were not costs at all. He picked up the pencil and started the drawings.